anyone have any? Thank you, Rachel. So, does anyone have any musical interlude suggestions? I happen to be a James Taylor fan, but I'm open to. Oh, no, we don't destroy the laptop yet. So, does anyone have requests? Yep. No, I know. You can look at the laptop. Just exiting out of the meeting would be bad. So, quick introductions. No typing. So this is my 3-year-old Mia. You want to say hello? Yeah. So, and this is my 2 month and a half Naomi. So.
Baby Naomi too.
Yes, baby Naomi. So, a minute.
You know what? I think we should get started for those that were here at 7, okay. And the others can join as they come in.
No problem. So yeah, unfortunately, trying to put on James Taylor one-handed does not work all the time. So I apologize. So hello, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. For anyone who doesn't know, my name is Dustin Hausner. I am the manager of the Synagogue Leadership Initiative, and I have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker for this evening, focused on leadership, which is, of course, our Rabbi Brad Hirschfield. I'm not going to go through the whole bio because you all should have gotten it in advance. And to be honest with you, it would take me a good 20 minutes to go through your whole bio because of just your many years of experience and many great achievements you've done. So at this point, I would like to toss it over to our wonderful guest to lead us in tonight's program. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dustin. Okay, so I do want to thank Dustin. I want to thank Cheryl and the Federation, and I want to thank all of each of you. The most precious time, a commodity anyone has, is their time, and you've chosen to spend it here. And since we are going to do this together, and I don't want to just hold forth for the next 52 minutes or whatever time we have, I would like to get to know who I'm talking with, because I hope this really will be as much conversation as presentation. So I'm going to ask people in no particular order to unmute yourselves and just one line. Who are you? What do you do when you're not on this call? Where are you calling? Where are you participating from? So someone be brave and jump in first. Go ahead, Michael.
So I guess it's 2 things. In a little more than a year, I'll be president of Temple Emeth in Teaneck. And I recently retired, so I have a little more time. I'm trying to catch up and join more seminars and webinars.
Okay, fantastic. Let me fold something by way of introduction that I'll ask each of you to do. What is the institutional challenge that you are dealing with? Just in a word or two, not a whole long thing. We can talk more later. But if I said, Michael, give me a word or two that is the essence of the institutional challenge you have, what is it?
People, the congregants, all different opinions. What's the right one?
Okay. Got it. Someone else jump in.
Hi, so Moshe Singer here from also Teaneck, Beth Aaron, so not too far away from where Michael is. I'd say when I'm not here, I'm either at work or having coffee, which is no lifeblood, as I hope everyone understands.
Definitely, I do.
My staff knows that if they want to talk to me, they bring me a cup of coffee because I'll savor the coffee and not scream at them. I think probably the biggest issue that we have is just generational differences. And obviously, as we've discussed at other SLI programming, different generations are looking for different things. And it's nice to be in a very multi-generational shul, and having grown up out of the New York area, it's nice to see very diverse shuls. But the problem is you have very different needs, wants, and expectations.
Absolutely. Makes total sense, Moshe. Thank you. Who else?
My name is Arthur Wiener. I'm the rabbi of the Jewish Community Center Paramus, Congregation Beth Tikva. I've been for the last 26 years. Brad, you and I met when we were both students on the Upper West Side many years ago. when I was
Absolutely.
At the seminary. You actually crashed in my room once on a Shabbos when you were staying over at the seminary or on the Upper West Side for something. In a word, rapidly changing demographics in the country, but in Bergen County, and the pandemic and all that it's ruined.
So Arth, can I draw you out a tiny bit? You're there a long time. The rabbi was right. You said two different things. I want a minute more on each one. One was demographic shift and the other
Yes.
was COVID.
Yes, that's correct.
Just a little bit more on each one.
Okay. My synagogue is a conservative synagogue. Changing demographics have been hard on all of our congregations in the non-Orthodox world, perhaps the conservative movement most significantly. We're finding it hard to make connections with the next, what I'll call the 40 and under crowd here in Bergen County. And we try hard, and we are, we always pride ourselves on being all things to all people, but that's not an approach that works anymore. Right. And COVID is, for at least in our congregation, but I can't imagine I'm alone. COVID pandemic has changed everything. And I always say we all agreed when the pandemic began, but at least in my congregation, we can't decide when the pandemic will be over, or if it's over, or if it's not.
Right. Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the expansion. I'm sure we all do. Who else wants to jump in? And for those of you who just joined us, I'm asking people to introduce yourself just very briefly, who you are, what your point of intersection is, and most importantly, what institutional challenge brings you to this conversation, in just a word or two. And if you're on mute, you need to unmute in order to participate. So I'm pausing here, and I want to make an observation that I hadn't expected to make. My guess is, and we'll work back to the 4 people who answered, and in no way does mean you shouldn't participate if you haven't already. But my guess is at some level, each and every one of you is concerned about issues of participation in your particular synagogue, and how people participate, what that means, and what they're looking for. I want to be really honest at the outset. If you yourselves won't participate in conversations like this, how can you possibly imagine your congregants will? And I'm not saying that to beat you up. I'm actually saying it so you can identify with having the exact same hesitancies and needs that they have. And that's already, if you take away nothing else from tonight, if you can move forward into your institution knowing that you are more like the very people who often frustrate you the most, you will have tapped into a very powerful resource for institutional transformation. My guess is, knowing what I know from the amount of time I've spent in Jewish life, is that everyone on this call at one time or another has worried about lack of participation, about, as Rabbi Wiener said, we try and we don't connect. If you have that frustration and you've said, wow, I was on a call where my participation was invited and I opted not to connect. Again, I'm not saying that to criticize anyone. I'm saying it to open a kind of empathy that you would realize the same challenges that you have with other people, you yourself experience. Everyone chooses to connect or not connect at different times. And if the only places we connect are the ones that we immediately feel, oh, that's easy, that's what I want to do, that's probably true for the people that are failing to connect with you too. And that becomes really important. So I do want to share that at the outset, if for no other reason than we would understand the challenges that each of our synagogues, our shuls, our institutions are facing they're actually not about our individual shul, our synagogue, or our institution. They're fundamental challenges about how human beings connect or fail to connect to each other. And lesson one is to remember that people who often frustrate us the most are more like us than we ever imagined. Because if we expect to be able to be in this kind of leadership setting and passively receive the tools we need in order to make sure that the shuls, the synagogues we love, the temples we love thrive and flourish maximally, and expect that to happen passively, well, that's exactly what most of your members or potential members are thinking. And you're sitting there going, folks, it doesn't work that way. We either have to participate in this together or we're not going anywhere. And yet that's exactly the challenge of this moment. So the first thing I want to invite us all to remember in the face of a moment when I agree with Rabbi Wiener, everything has changed, though we're going to see everything has always been changing. So simultaneously, I want you to spend the rest of the 48 minutes we have together knowing two things. Everything is different, and everything is different in ways everything has always been different, which is a nice way of saying we've been there before, which means we can get through this. You have to both honor the need for real serious transformation, but I invite you to have tremendous confidence in the Jewish people and in its tradition. And to know that as much as everything demands transformation, we have been there before. We have been there before for 3,000 years and we're still here. So I promise you, not that I can tell you what it will look like, but I can promise you that at the end of the day, we will be here. And that begins with first appreciating that we are more alike, even with those who frustrate us most, than we often realize. Okay, with that as the frame, the four people who did jump in, and again, the invitation is there. It is never too late to say, wow, I really hear that. I want to add something. I would invite you to unmute if and when you get to that place, interrupt me, it's no problem. It's far more important that you participate tonight than what I say. And that's not because I'm being modest. It's because I live in Riverdale. I belong to multiple shuls and everything's okay. My job here is to serve you. You live in your communities. And so the more you participate, the closer this will come to realizing your aspirations. And I promise you that your aspirations are what will invite other people's participation. And those are the two most important things. So I think it was Michael who first jumped in. He said, the problem I have is people. By the way, Michael, you should know, that is a typical comment from shul presidents of every denomination in every region. You said it more nicely. Typically what I hear is, they are making me crazy. And you added to that, there's too many opinions, and I don't know, we don't know which one is right. I want you to hold on to that thought with the suggestion that transformation and leadership are about knowing how to act without being utterly convinced you know what is right. Because typically, if you wait for absolute certainty to know what is right, the moment will have passed. And if you pretend you know what is absolutely right, you will push out anyone and everyone who doesn't completely agree with you. The art of leadership, if the question is too many opinions and too many people, is having enough confidence to act and enough humility to appreciate, no, we don't know exactly what's right. We gather the best available information, we make the wisest possible decision, and we admit we're not certain, which means we will re-invite other people's participation and opinion. Most people think that either to lead, you have to know with certainty, or since knowing with certainty often makes people arrogant and jerky, you can't really ever act at all. Robert, please.
Yes, I did get on a little late and I apologize, but
No worries.
I will tell you that I did not respond because I wanted to see what your response would be if it was very limited, because I know what my response would be, and it's very interesting to see how others deal with the situation we're all faced with.
Okay, what would your response have been?
My response would have been, we must be in this together, and to succeed, we must be a team. And there is no I in team, as the expression goes. And either we fail together or we succeed together.
Great. I want to push into that as we go through the evening, because if you and I, and we're in agreement, are right, that means knowing it's not just some they who have to get on our team, but it's also communicating that we, from where we are, have to be on their team. And that's hard. By the way, it's such a shocking insight, not one of the texts I shared with you, that if you go back into the book of Genesis, if you look at Sefer Breshit, and there's Hagar with Ishmael, utterly abandoned, and God's comfort to Hagar, I always have to stop and say it in Hebrew, and I can do it in English, is that I will be with that child where he is. Right? Ba'asher Husham. That means that it's not simply about building community by bringing others to where we are. It's actually figuring out with integrity. I want to be clear. If being where someone else is means you give up your integrity, that's no solution either. But actually figuring out how, to quote Robert, if there is no I in team, that means as much as they need to be on our team, we need to be on theirs. And it's a very different model for leadership and synagogue building, which is usually framed as matters of marketing and recruitment and outreach. I want to suggest that actually outreach is not such a helpful term. And it is in English. My response to being a somewhat more complicated, if not negative term, has to do with the phrase in Hebrew that's usually used, that's rendered as outreach, is kiruv, to bring someone close. It's a beautiful idea, right? There's only one problem for me. If I'm bringing someone close, it means that I start with the premise that they are what? Right, that they are far. How many people like to be told, actually, you're very far away, but if you would listen to me, I could make you closer. You can unmute, Robert, and participate. Everyone can unmute. It's okay. You don't have to stay on mute. Because, Robert, I saw you commenting and you're on mute, so unmute.
Yeah, nobody wants to be in that position.
Right. And it takes tremendous leadership to have the courage to say, I love where I am. But the problem is not that you are far from me. It's that we together have to create something that actually works for us. And I will tell you something you all already know, but Rabbi Wiener had the bravery to say. There is no such thing as being all things to all people. And you have to decide as leaders if you can feel that you're a success, even though you're not all things to all people. In fact, I will go further. You cannot identify a serious leader in Jewish history who was ever all things to all people. And if you want to add a layer of ethics to leadership, the ethical leader knows they can't be all things to all people, but make sure that they treat all those to whom they cannot be there for with dignity and respect. The fact of the matter is, if God came back and built the perfect fill in the blank, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist synagogue, the perfect one, it would not be for everyone. And it wouldn't be a failure that it's not for everybody. The failure is not in failing to be for everyone. It's in failing to be for those you want to serve and to be able to do so with integrity. And that's even within a certain denomination. Whether it's the Reform movement deciding how much of a previous iteration of a Siddur they want to use, or a new one with how much English or how much Hebrew, and an Orthodox shul with how high is the mechitza really going to be? And whose position will you follow in that? And you can't do it in multiple ways. And it doesn't mean the other ones are wrong. It means it's a legitimate disagreement. And the real test of ethical leadership is to passionately build what you love, knowing there is no being everything to everybody, but there's always the requirement to treat the everybody, even if they're not yours, with dignity and respect. Now, I'll also let you in on a secret. Since so few places manage to do that very well, when you start doing that to people, guess what? They want to come to your institution. And I have stories from every denomination. I know people who literally, one woman who said, they're stealing my reform movement by shoving in all that Hebrew. And she ended up going to a new temple because she felt respected there. And I could do the same thing at the other end of the spectrum, where someone I knew who railed against, oh, the mechitzas are getting too high in my community. I'm not talking about Teaneck. And ended up being in a shul that had the highest mechitza she'd ever davened in, because she actually felt her line, I feel more seen in that shul than in my more progressive one. So it's not that there are too many opinions. It's that I think we feel overwhelmed by the number of opinions because we think we're supposed to resolve them all at the outset, and we're not. So what I would invite you to think about, Michael, is not how you will have the right answer for everybody, but how will you make real decisions and leave room for the answers you couldn't take up and treat the people who had them in a certain way. Yeah, Robert, please.
I was just going to say that negativity is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of engagement, because any reaction, bad or good, is a reaction and a conversation.
Yes. And by the way, you can go with no negativity, but don't be surprised with a very small place.
Yes.
And that's not bad. There are plenty of communities that are comfortable being small because they want lockstep agreement. And I defend that. If that's what people want, that's what they should have. What's a death spiral is saying we want to be big, but we want lockstep agreement. That doesn't exist. Someone mentioned so Rabbi Wiener's generational differences. And when I asked to say more, you talk about competing needs. It's not just that people are of different generations. They legitimately have different needs. And if you know that it's not simply generational, but people have legitimately different needs, then how you lead to meet different needs begins to shift. Right? The example I would give on that one is very simple. If someone brought me to an absolutely blot kosher restaurant, it's funny, this came up today because someone wanted to go to such a place on the Upper West Side. And this restaurant, other than pickles, has nothing that is vegetarian. I happen to be a vegetarian. So it turns out, by the way, it's supposed to be an outstanding restaurant. It's called Izzy's Smokehouse. My kids say it's unbelievable. They're waiting, because I'll be away in 2 Shabbatot, my youngest will be home with my wife. They'll have Izzy's. Why? Because they can all eat it. But if you brought me to Izzy's and saw that I didn't eat, you might conclude, well, Brad isn't hungry. If he was hungry, he'd eat. Or you might conclude, wow, I wonder if Brad has a different need that can't be met by this menu. My sense is when it comes to synagogue life and people aren't eating, so to speak, we assume it's because they're not hungry. Now, for some people, that may be true, but for most people, it's not. For most people, it's that the menu we offer doesn't suit their hunger. And that doesn't mean it's a bad menu, and it doesn't mean they have a bad hunger. It just means you don't confuse someone not being alongside you on any given Friday night or Saturday morning or whatever the program may be with them not having needs. There are different kinds of needs. And we talked about demographic shifts.
So, Rabbi, can I interrupt you there for a second?
Please, yeah, by all means.
So obviously different demographics have different needs, but at least what I'm seeing, and again, I've only been present for a month and I haven't quit yet, which is pretty good.
Amazing.
But no, just looking at an email I got yesterday, from a congregant who's looking at our 4 minyanim we have for Rosh Hashanah, and to oversimplify it, our main minyan's the most seats, but also not say the emptiest, it's the fullest minyan, but it's obviously the most open capacity because people are not looking necessarily for that main minyan type of situation. So the request was, what can we do to cancel different minyans so we have more people in the main minyan, because I want to be at a fuller minyan. So he's not saying what's in it for them. He says, I want people to conform to what I'm looking for. But we obviously offer different times and speeds and variations, but what I see, what at least I've been seeing, having been on the board for 14 years, is everyone asks, why are they not doing what I want them to do as opposed to what they want to do?
Yes, and I by the way, I think we all do that, right? Shuls do it, rabbis do it. God help me, not this group, of course, but some shul presidents do it. Congregants always do it. And I think the move there, the first move is to ask what the need is, because ironically, Moshe, that's a need that the tradition already identified for 2,000 years of Barovam Hadrat Melech, that we honor God most in large groups. So the fact is, I'm not saying you're going to end up constructing the main minyan to meet his need, but think about the conversations. Oh, wow, I know what you're asking for. You're asking us to figure out how to honor this teaching of the sages that in the meeting of individual needs, we may have shortchanged. Now, please come be our partner and let's figure out how. This coming Rosh Hashanah, we do two things, both of which are critical. Remember that it's the birthday of humanity and that every person is created in the image of God. And so tailor making the experience as much as possible is absolutely honoring part of our story. And also, so is the idea that actually we honor God best when we come together the most. Now you have a situation in which for this member, it's not, why can't the president and the rabbi do this the way I like? And it's, wow, I'm on the inside of trying to solve a problem our tradition has had for over 3 millennia. How do I give individuals what they want and still build a sense of, gosh, we're a big people? And let him help solve that problem. I don't know what to come up with. But I know that's the leadership move. Is to and by the way, I don't know that I would frame it exactly that way for a different community, but at least your community I know a little bit, your rabbi I know a little bit, so I can frame it that way. And I know absolutely unless the person's really just a difficult, horrible person, but I tend not to believe that about people.
Well, he's not difficult. He just wants to see 550 people at his minyan, and the chazan
Guess
goes
what?
about 550 hours, which is why.
Right. That's exactly right. But now that's the interesting thing, because now you have a way of saying it. I share that desire, but every desire has a cost. Go back to Rabbi Wiener. You can't be all things to all people. Be on the inside with us, whoever you are, Rabbi, and help us solve that problem. I don't know what that solution will look like, but I know these are two competing needs, and that certainly on the high holidays, they come up in a very serious way.
Raj, can I just interject something, please?
Please.
We're living at a time, and again, I'm speaking for the non-Orthodox world because the dynamics are different in the Orthodox community. But our synagogue model depends on people supporting the mission of the synagogue through what we'll call membership. When people are feeling that their needs are, the previous generation saw the community, the synagogue, as a basic communal responsibility. And the last generation and a half sees it differently. And if people's needs at that moment are not being fulfilled, they have the freedom to walk off.
Yes.
And they do, which is difficult for the synagogue, and it's difficult for those of us who have relationships with people. Like I said, I've been rabbi in my community for 26 years. It's very painful when people that you've worked with, work for, and they wander off.
So I want to start by thanking you. because the bravery to address a traumatic shift, and it is a traumatic shift, speaking in the first person and from a place of vulnerability is really, really important. It's brave and it's wise, and I want to thank you for it. And I want us all to know that we all know very few leaders, and I can say this because the rabbi did it, and I can make fun of the rest of the rabbis because I am one. Most rabbis don't. To be able to say, you know what, it's painful. I love my synagogue. I worked very hard for this community, and not just hard, but I served them well, and things are changing, and it's not clear it's sustainable, and it's painful. First of all, half the people who would hear that from you would stay, not because they believe in the synagogue per se, but they believe in you. And they believe in a leader who's willing to be honest about their vulnerability. Because how many leaders, social, political, communal, of any kind, are actually honest about their vulnerability? For that alone, half of them will stick around. By the way, we know the demographic reality is that while Americans, and this is not just American Jews loving rabbis, Americans as a group who are walking away from religious institutional affiliation still love their clergy.
Yes.
They love their clergy.
Yes.
Which means once upon a time in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, the path to the clergy was people wanted a synagogue. And because they had a synagogue, they had to have a rabbi. Ironically, now it's the reverse. They want a rabbi, and if they have to have a rabbi, they need a synagogue, they'll tolerate a synagogue. Now that puts a lot of pressure on the synagogue model. It does, and we would have to spend time really talking about that. But let's be clear. There's a difference between a business model problem and a mission problem. The business model of the synagogue, that is people paying dues to belong to an institution so that they can get specific services, no pun intended, actually is going to shrink. My read is that certainly outside the Orthodox community, there the pressure will be towards what's often called stabilization, right? Things will not break apart because the big synagogues will have no one to daven in them, but the big shuls will now be 6 different minyanim, meeting in multiple different places with part-time rabbis who are teaching in your local yeshiva high school. And I mean, you know, so the pressures are there in general. The business model for the American synagogue is under tremendous pressure. But I beg you, do not conflate a business model problem with a mission and service problem. Now, it doesn't mean they both don't have to be met, but you don't solve a business problem simply by chasing a new mission. It doesn't work. There's no track record for that. You may have to reorient the size of the synagogue and the shape of those who serve it and how, and a million other things that we can talk about. We will with what time we have. That's another way of saying don't conflate a mission problem and a membership problem. I don't even know your synagogue, Arthur. I doubt you have any kind of mission problem. My guess is you don't even have a membership problem if that means good feelings on the part of people who are both members and non-members about you and what you do. What you may probably, I'm almost certain you do have. You have a dues-paying membership problem. Now, that doesn't minimize the problem. It just means it's a different challenge. Because in the same way that people participate in all institutions differently, of course we're participating differently, and there's nothing that we as Jews are going to be able to do about it. Because here's the thing, folks, the heyday of big synagogues in this country had nothing to do with us being Jewish. The heyday of big synagogues in this country was that after World War II, Jews came home from the first time fighting side by side in the United States of America along our Gentile neighbors, participated in mass suburbanization, were welcomed to be normal, and just like First Presbyterian and United Methodist were being built kitty corner from each other in the Main Street and First Avenue intersections of every community in this country, and Jews were also welcome to build a temple or a synagogue, there we did. And so people paid good money to be a part of that, not because of what went on there Friday night or Saturday morning. In fact, participation rates and services were often lower in the heyday of the building of those institutions. They built those institutions because the building of them was what they most needed. And they needed them because it allowed them to be normal. They could be across the street from their Gentile neighbors for the first time and say, you know what? We're just as normal and just as good as you. And they happily paid their membership dues, not because Friday night services or Shabbos morning davening were so inspiring, not because they were so much more pious. They did it because to upkeep of that synagogue, by the way, not unlike the upkeep of the temple when it stood in Jerusalem. We know the Jewish people weren't so pious. You know how we know? The prophets are filled with telling them, stop worshiping idols. You don't keep telling people to stop worshiping idols unless they're worshiping idols. So why do they keep up this massive institution? Because it made them feel proud. The age of the American synagogue was built not on piety, but on pride. And we don't need that kind of pride anymore, because guess what? We are normal. Our parents and grandparents' success means that our children and grandchildren, don't get me wrong, I think they could use good synagogues, but they don't need them for that. Which means paying membership dues and saying, you know how I'm Jewish? I support my synagogue. And I support Rabbi Wiener, who's a college-educated, English-speaking rabbi. That was a big deal when the conservative movement was the largest movement in America. It met a very serious need, and it had nothing to do with the piety of the people inside the synagogue. The needs have changed. And to imagine that as we stand in this moment of institutional challenge, which is what we're all dealing with, and you've said it, is the challenge of being at a turning point, and then at every turning point, you make a choice. In every institutional moment of change, do you dig in, put up the sandbags, and fight against whatever is coming at you? Or do you open yourself to new possibilities? And I'm not even telling you which one is right. If you wanted, I could spend time showing you our tradition has models of both. The idea of a saving remnant, a sherita pleta, goes back to the time of the prophets. The idea that there are people, and every denomination has them, the purists for the cause. That is a coping mechanism for a moment of change. And by the way, I want those people to have exactly what they want if it's sustainable institutionally. It's not my particular approach to things, but I can't lie. Right? The person who says everything went down in this shul when the first time we had women officers on the board, to the person who says they destroyed the reform movement when they took out the pipe organ and started adding in Hebrew. All of those are legitimate things to say, but then you shrink, and that's okay. It's how do you provide for people given that need? The other thing is to try something new, and that's hard. And I saw, Judy, you had a hand. I want to offer one text. It's the first text in the sheet that you were shared with, but you don't have to even look at it, because it's one simple phrase from the Midrash and the Mechilta, the commentary, the Midrash, in this case on the Parashah of Yitro. It happens to be the portion of the week when the Torah is revealed at Sinai. And in the context of that, the rabbis teach all beginnings are difficult. And in a world in which everything new and novel is touted as shiny and exciting, I want to invite us to remember that the notion that all beginnings are difficult, that all innovations are difficult, means that if it isn't difficult, it's not a real new beginning. So whatever it is you're setting out to do, if you think it's going to be easy, that's fine, but don't pretend it's an innovation, and don't call it a new beginning. The genius of this teaching is not to tell people that all beginnings are difficult. Most of us know that. The real insight is that if it's not difficult to reposition your community, that's fine, but just know if it's not difficult, it's not a real beginning. And people need to know that. That doesn't mean it should always be difficult. You may say, we don't need difficult, schmifficult. We're going to find someone to give us a couple $1 million, and we're going to sustain this just the way it is. And it's okay if we go from 400 families to 50 families, because we can pay the bills for 50 families and let the other 350 figure it out for themselves. I mean that. But if you think, no, we're going to reposition, and everyone's going to pay their dues, and we're going to have the same robust numbers, and don't worry, we know just how to do this, it'll be easy. That's not possible. All beginnings are difficult, which means if it's not difficult, it's not a beginning. It's not an innovation. And in a world that right now thinks innovation is the sexiest thing in the world and loves to talk about it, and then forgets to tell you it's not so simple, that's bad faith. And so I want you to feel that going in as leaders, to have the permission, you can dig in, you can radically reorient, but whatever you do, if you think you're going to innovate and they're all going to come flooding back and it'll just be easy, it doesn't work that way. And that's important to know, to give yourself permission accordingly. Judy, you had a comment, and then Dustin, you had a comment. But Judy, you got to come off mute.
Hi, I'm just so glad to be on right now because I had so much trouble getting in. But hi, and I'm listening, and it's very consoling to hear you say how difficult and that we have to, change things, because we do.
Well, again, I want to be clear. I don't know if you do. That's institution by institution. But yes, you have to start from feeling consoled that it's difficult, which doesn't mean you don't have to do it. It means you've got to do it mindfully, and that you can honor the people who go, Judy, what are you doing? You're taking away my temple. And you might really have to be able to say to them, let's talk about that. We're going to see in a minute. Sometimes that does happen. And we'd have to decide, is it worth it? Why or why not? And that is hard. But I know this, if you're honest about it with each other, you're more likely to hold more of those people, even as you go through the change. And even the ones who don't stay on the inside of your community, you'll help them find another community. And that means that in the aggregate, the larger community of which you're all a part will be strengthened. And that's not a small thing. Right? To imagine being a synagogue that says, look, we've decided this is the path we're going to follow, but we promise no one will ever be left out. If it turns out this isn't the place for you, our job isn't done until you have another place. Because we really believe there needs to be a place for every Jew. Right? Dustin, you were going to say something, and then Robert.
Yeah, so I actually had two leadership situations I wanted to ask about. One of them is I have found in my experience on both several boards I've been on locally in Rockland, both synagogue and non, that sometimes you have maybe 3 to 5 people who are very active, and then kind of everyone else is there. And the problem is when it comes to secession time, the president leaves for whatever reason, there's no people that are necessarily considered for stepping up or taking over. The other one is I've been the residential young person on several boards, and there's always an assumption that, oh, this is the young person. They have nothing better to do. We're going to give them and expect them to do these million tasks, and they're just going to naturally become the new leadership because we gave them a board position. So those are two, and I see there's a couple of heads moving, so I'm glad I'm not alone, but would love to get your insight on both.
You are definitely not alone. Let me get a couple of questions out, and then I'll kind of deal with them together. Robert, please.
I was just going to say, when you talk about new beginnings, to me, a lot of that goes back to being proactive versus reactive. And I find that many of our problems occur because we wait too late to address them and attempt to solve them. For instance, a lot of the families that we leave, I wouldn't feel badly if they went somewhere else where they felt more comfortable. My being upset is the fact they aren't going anywhere else. They're leaving the community to a certain effect, and that hurts a lot.
Great. So this, by the way, I can answer these two together in the sense that you're both addressing the issue of both cultivating leadership and cultivating followership. And they are both active processes. In fact, the first job of any leader is to look around and ask, who can do your job if you're not there? And if you don't have that person clearly in place, that's job number one. And it's not just job number one because, oh, we've got to take care of the future. That's also true. It also sets a very clear tone that leadership is not about a role, it's about a willingness. And you're not the only one who's willing. And if you go from one person who's willing to two people who's willing, and two people are willing to four people who are willing, you begin to populate the mindset, oh, I could be in leadership. I could exercise leadership. And conversely, Robert, you're right, that's true for followership. My guess is, won't do it tonight, how many synagogues actually have not only an intake process for new members, but an outplacement service for people who are leaving?
Just as important.
That actually say, by the way, I'm going to be really radical here, and not just because this is being convened by Federation. It may be that you and your Jewish journey are done with synagogues, but we as a synagogue can't be done until we feel we've helped you find a place somewhere in Jewish life. And it may be that you're going to call Dustin or Cheryl, and you're going to say, I realized that after all these years where synagogue was the center of my Jewish life, I actually think there are other ways to serve the Jewish people and build Jewish destiny. And maybe that could be with you. And that's hard because it means being so brave that you realize your institution is not in the business of being in business. Your institution is in the business of helping people to be the best Jew they can be as they understand it. And that is hard. And there will be limits, and not every place will do it the same way. But that would be an example. No one ever leaves us without having a place to land, at least if we have anything to say about it. Right? And I that really isn't always easy. I got in a lot of trouble with someone, another community, in which a leading modern Orthodox or centrist Orthodox rabbi was very upset because I suggested that perhaps it wasn't a complete tragedy if members of the shul who were no longer interested in being in that shul actually made a serious commitment to Esha Torah that was coming into that community. And this rabbi called me and said, "His words, shame on you. That's the competition and we have to win." And I said, I understand what you mean by competition, but the we that I think has to win is Klal Yisrael, is the Jewish people. And I said, now, since I've upset you by sending them to a more right-leaning community, Rabbi, I don't know if you'll hate me more or be more comforted. If they needed to go to a Reform temple, I'd be just as proud of helping them go there. Because I never confuse the shul I want to be a part of with the shul that everyone should be a part of. But of course, ironically, when you tell that to most Jews, they go, I want to go to that shul. Because of course, what you just told them is that they are more important than your shul. And that's the shul most people want to be a part of. Look, I do want for a few minutes to look at a text because while it will not guarantee the outcomes, I think there's a lot of brilliance in having been in this moment before, in a very similar moment, although a much more tragic one, much more tragic because the world was acting upon us. We were not nearly as empowered or strong or free as we are today as Jews in North America in the 21st century. And it's a long story that we'll have to go through quickly, more quickly than I would like. And if you want to do it at greater length some other time, I promise I will, but I also promise that at 8 o'clock we're wrapping up because I want to be respectful of your time. So this story is a passage from the Babylonian Talmud. And if you have it in front of you, great. I gave you to in English. I'll take us through in English since I assume that's most comfortable for most people. If you don't look at the page, I'm going to read it out loud and I'm going to skip so we can move quickly. Abba Sikra, the head of the Biryoni in Jerusalem, was the son of the sister of Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Abba Sikra, which is not his given name, Abba Sikra literally means the father of the knife. And I have a very hard time believing that when this young man at his bris was named, they called out, may his name be called in Israel, the father of knives, right? He was a gangster. Biryoni literally means the gangsters, the ruffians. These often translate as the zealots. These are the zealots who are in control of this besieged city of Jerusalem. We are literally in the year 70, in roughly the month we're in right now. It was probably around June of the year 70. The Roman 10th Legion has surrounded the city of Jerusalem. The city is in the control of these zealots. And the head of the zealots was also the nephew of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now, by the way, if you don't know who he is, it doesn't matter. What you need to know is from the standpoint of the person telling the story here, they all know he's the hero of the story. He is the rabbi who we're going to see what he did that in many ways gives birth to the structure that would become Rabbinic Judaism. But if you're reading this in the story, this story is from the 4th century, it's about 330 years later, you all know you're indebted to this rabbi. You know he's the hero. So how does the story open? Guess what? The hero of the story and the villain of the story, the zealot, the ruffian, are family. By the way, again, if you take nothing away from this, in a moment of transition, can you identify that the people most opposed to institutional change and the ones most in favor of it actually are part of the same family? And will you promise to treat each other that way? You don't need to go any further in this story. You want to manage institutional change as a leader? Remember, the person you agree with most and the person who tortures you the most, you're all the same family. By the way, that means two things. You will break each other's heart like no one else, because strangers don't break each other's heart, right? The fact is, if you're in Robert's shul and you sit in on Moshe's board meeting, or vice versa, neither one of you is going to get so upset about the outlier because you don't have to deal with them next Shabbat. But if you're inside my community and you're the person I'm sitting next to on Shabbat morning and you're torturing me, oh my God, I want to tear out my hair out or your hair out, but all the hair is coming out. That's fact one of being family. The other fact is we are in this together no matter what. That's what family means in this story. We are in this together no matter what. You want to manage institutional change? Step one, we are a family and we are in this together no matter what. So the nephew comes, the latter sent to him saying, the Rabbi Yochanan sends to his nephew saying, come visit me privately. By the way, why privately? And my questions aren't rhetorical. Every line in the story is told with purpose. Why does he invite his nephew, the leader, the general, the guy in control of the city, to come visit him, the rabbi? Not a very important person, actually, in terms of the reality on the ground. He says, but come visit me privately. Why? Why does he invite him to come privately, do you think? You can't get it wrong. I'm just curious what you might think. So I will tell you what I think. He wanted to make it safe for him to have the conversation. He understood this was going to be risky. Whether the risk is look, we have to think about merging with another temple. We have to raise or lower the mechitza, whatever. We have to have 1 minyan or 5 on Shabbat morning. Let's start quietly and privately. Not some big splash. We're going to change everything and the whole world's going to come back to us. It'll be just like 1978 all over again. No. We're going to begin talking to each other as family, and we're going to do it privately. When he came to him, he said, how long are you going to carry on this way and kill all the people with starvation? Right? The rabbi uncle is pretty annoyed with his nephew. He's going to kill everyone with your extremism. The nephew says, what can I do? If I say a word to them, they will kill me. How often do we imagine that the people who are arguing with us the most, it's not because of how powerful they are, but how disempowered they feel? And how often do we look at ourselves and say, am I fighting now because I'm in control? Or am I fighting with this person now because despite what the title on the stationery says, I actually feel completely out of control? So he goes on and he says, look, figure out some way to get me out of here because maybe I can save a little something. By the way, that's a big deal. What if we've been misled by the image of Babe Ruth calling the shot? I'm going to hit it out of the park. What every change consultant tells every person they consult for. I'm worth it because you're going to hit a home run this way. Everything will be different if you just follow what I'm saying. What if that's actually the wrong approach? What if, if we talk to each other with dignity and with respect, maybe we can save something we both want here. And most powerfully, we don't have time to go through it line by line. The plan is actually the Rabban Yochanan is smuggled out of the city as a corpse. It's a corpse. At any moment of institutional change, every party to the process better be willing to identify what they're willing to let go of. Because change does mean letting go. There is death, even in institutional transformation. And if no one is honest about that, I promise you people are paying for it and are hurting. But if you're honest about it, you can probably get through it together. Right? It's genius what they did here. They admit that there's real death in the midst of this. And at the end of the day, and again, I wish we had time, we don't. Rabbi Yochanan goes out. He has this wild conversation with the soon-to-be emperor who doesn't understand how this rabbi could know he's going to be emperor, but he does know he's going to be emperor because a runner comes in and says, the Senate just met, you're now the new emperor. And he says, oh my God, who are you? You're some like miracle man. I'll grant you anything you want. Now remember, the emperor of Rome is offering this rabbi anything he wants. This is the ultimate genie in a bottle story. And what is it that Rabbi Yochanan says is, give me Yavna and its sages. Give me this out-of-the-way town. And it was an out-of-the-way, it's still an out-of-the-way town. And it was an out-of-the-way town then even more. In fact, there are some historians who think that the word Yavna is actually a Hebrew mispronunciation of the word Yevani, Greek, that it was a Gentile garrison town. And this rabbi says, let me go sit there with my students. Because there's no big council of sages. 2 students left with him, he might have had a few other friends. Let me go to Yavna and let us begin talking about the future. And if we can begin to talk about the future, we can begin to create the future. The institutional transformation that begins to unfold, it will be 100 years from this conversation before the first major document of rabbinic Judaism, the Mishnah, is published. 100 years. The best practice for institutional transformation we know is to enter into conversation with as many people as possible, do it in a way that you promise to be in it together no matter what, and understand that these transformations take real time. In the short term, if the reason you're panicked about giving them time is because you need more money to sustain the venture, that's fine. That's when it's time to sit down and say, we know how to manage our institution beautifully and respectfully and creatively. In the meantime, we've got to figure out how to find the dollars we need for the short term in order to continue that conversation. In my experience, when people know that's what the dollars are being sought for, they will hang in. Because the two things I know, no one has ever said they've been loved too much or listened to too much. The sages created a community. When I say love, I don't mean wishy-washy hearts and flowers. I mean, they hung in with each other. They talked about everything. They fought about everything, and they knew they'd show up the next day to do it again. And when you build those kinds of relationships and give it enough time, the transformations that do have to happen will happen. I want to be clear. I can't promise you what they'll look like on the back end. What I can promise you is that just as it was then, so it will be again. There will be a place for every Jew who wants one and needs one. That's the beginning of the best practices of leadership in a moment of transformation. We'll see, maybe in the fall, we'll get back together and continue some more of that, what that looks like. We're 2 minutes over, so I want to end with just a quick invitation. And that is that from my perspective, my phone line and my email are open. I wasn't joking. To stand at the intersection and build community writ large, which is my understanding what Federation does, and making sure that there are spiritual, intellectual homes for every kind of Jew who wants one, which is what every one of your synagogues does. There is nothing more sacred, and I'm here to help in any way I can. And so we're absolutely, that's not a plea for business. That's saying you can call me, you can email me, and I absolutely consider it as much a part of what we did here tonight to be available to do that for you as much as I can between now and the next time we're together. I want to stop where I started by thanking you for your time and thanking you for your leadership.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you all. I look forward to being with you again sometime down the road.
So before anyone disappears, which I know one or two already have, so in the survey, please complete the survey. You also get an email as well of what you thought of the program. I have two little ones, so I'm not going to bed anytime soon. I still, I accept my fate that I'll maybe get 4 hours if I'm lucky. That's not a joke. So I'll stick on for a few extra minutes in case there was anyone who felt that they had maybe a burning question that they didn't have a chance to ask. Rabbi, if you don't mind, just for a few extra minutes, just in case.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around.
So
I'm good until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning when I have to go to
all right, so I'll get the marshmallows, the kosher marshmallows.
But it's not Shavuot, so I would like to get some sleep.
But first of all, just wow, an incredible program, and I'm very thrilled that so many people have been enjoying it. I did want to offer, since the rabbi had offered, just a few extra minutes in case there was any questions or anything anyone didn't have a chance to ask. I know a couple of people came in late, but otherwise, I'm very pleased that this is the program we're having, and then having a bit of a summer break, and then having a very large slew of fantastic programs coming up very soon. So want to just give an opportunity if anyone has anything they want to ask the rabbi or share, and then we'll call it an evening.
I'm going to have to sign off, but I want to say thank you again, and I look forward to re-engaging the conversation. Thank you all very much.
Be well, all the best.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, good.
All right, it seems everyone's good then. So if that is the case, then everyone, oh, Judy, did you want to say something? I'm sorry. My apologies. My child's in the background telling me that we need to clean the table. So, yes, we're gonna go clean the table. So I guess, oh, did you want to say something? Sorry. Nope. Okay. If that's the case, then I think we'll call it a wonderful, wonderful, successful evening. Thank
Be
you.
well, everybody. Good night.
You,
Thanks.
thank you.